Thank you very much for coming. My name is Jenson, and I'm a middle child of 5. I grew up in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. And as would luck have it, my older sister was smarter, bigger, and tougher than I was. So I learned early on, if you pick a fight with someone like that, you're going to come out on the wrong end of it. My mom was my hero. My mom was my best friend. My dad was my hero. Dad was hard to get to know. My mom was always right out there. You're a faith-based group, so I can go into a little bit more detail than I might normally. Growing up, I'd always thought that our whole family was on the same page religiously. But as I got older, I found that my father was not nearly as convinced as my mother that Jesus was his Savior. But my mom was really the one that transmitted a faith to me and my siblings. Dad took a while, and he passed away in the 1980s, and by then he'd made significant movement. But it was my mom that I always felt was the one who transmitted a faith to me. I went to public high school in Sleepy Eye, Minnesota, and then after that I went to the University of Minnesota and got a degree in physiology. In the mid-1970s, my life changed a lot. Mom died of colon cancer in her 40s. I got into dental school and started studying dentistry. And I found that I really enjoyed the biochemistry, the anatomy, the biology, but I really didn't like teeth, and that was a problem. So I did the logical thing. I requested a leave of absence, and I went to the seminary. And in that seminary year, I grieved my mom's death. I studied lots of Old Testament history, a fair amount of the New Testament, and I made 2 big decisions. One is, I was dating this brilliant, lovely, hot chick. So I asked her to marry me. And we've been together 43 years, and we have 3 children. Christy's an anesthesiologist, Matt is an estate attorney, and Jackie's a family doc. I made another big decision that year, and that was that I was going to go into medicine, because I felt that that would be the best fit for my faith and my love of the sciences. So I decided to go into medicine. I got in, went through medical school, did my residency at Bethesda Hospital in North St. Paul, and then I went to Wabasha and practiced there for a couple of years. And yes, you might be wondering, I did get a chance to take care of a few grumpy old men. My wife and I relocated to Carver County in Watertown and Waconia area. Mary's a veterinarian, and there was no real work done in Wabasha at all, but up in Carver County, she had plenty of opportunities. That's where we raised our children. During those years, I was on the school board for 10 years, and I was chairman for 4. I served in the church council, and I was president of the church council, and we had a wonderful life. In 2001, I made the decision, actually, my wife and I made the decision together. I came home and she said, "Something's bugging you, what's up?" And I said, "Mary, I think I've got to leave the clinic." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "It's not about the relationship anymore. It's just about, you got to see so many patients a day, you got to move. And I feel like they don't really want me to invest in my patients. They want me just to do it the way everybody else does. And I don't want to do that because I know I'm going to burn out." And oftentimes you get up in the morning and you feel like, okay, I got 12 hours that I've got to put into patient care. And so you start with the hospital, you go to the clinic, you go back to the hospital, maybe deliver a couple of babies, and it was just wearing on you. And so Mary said, "Well, if you think we need to leave and start our own clinic, let's do it." So in 2001, we started our own clinic, and we called it Catalyst Medical Clinic. And we wanted our clinic to be a catalyst for patients to feel empowered to be their own best champion. And we made a commitment. Patients are going to be encouraged to do whatever it is that they feel comfortable doing. And what that meant was it immediately opened up a lot of relationships for me to start working more closely with chiropractors and acupuncturists and homeopaths and naturopaths and life coaches, as well as ministers. And it's the best thing that I ever did, because 20 years later, I still have the passion to take care of patients. And that's going to come up later in our talk, because regardless of how hard anyone might try, you're not going to be able to make a career politician out of me, because I'm going back to the office in some time in the future, and I'm going to take care of my patients. In 2017, we built a second clinic, and that was in Chaska. So we had one in Watertown, one in Chaska, and my youngest daughter, Jackie, now runs that. So let's go back to 2015, a couple of years before we built our second clinic. All the kids were gone. They were in college. We were empty nesters. None of the kids were married. Mary and I decided this is the time to go to Israel. So we went to Israel and we followed the 12 steps. We did 12 days of Jesus, and it was a terrific trip. We got back. 5 days after I got back, I got a phone call from someone in the House of Representatives. And they said, Scott, we need you to run for the Senate. We need you to do it real soon, because if you announce real quickly, maybe nobody else will run, and you'd be great. And I said to him, I said, Joe, I don't know what you've been smoking, but you gotta cut back. But he was relentless. And so we had breakfast 4 days later, and he pushed me some more. And I said, Joe, why are you doing this? I said, no, thank you. It's flattering. Thank you for asking me. But, you know, I'm a family doc. I did 10 years on the school board. That was enough. He said, no, he said, healthcare is the elephant in the room, and you know healthcare. And transportation's a big deal. And you've been involved in a lot of projects in Carver County. And public education's a big deal. And you know school board. You need to do this. Well, 2 months later, I agreed. It took 2 months. So we ran, and then in 2016, I was named Family Practice Doctor of the Year in Minnesota. We were, thank you. We were successful in our election, and we actually, it's always we, because it's Mary and I. But I had more votes than any other Republican senator in the state, and I celebrated 30 years of teaching at the medical school. So it was a big year. And then the next 4 years came. So now I'm juggling a full-time family practice, as well as during the session. Certainly it's full-time. It's usually about maybe 60 hours a week during the session as a senator. So it was a lot of work, but I thrive on that. But I learned some really important things in those 4 years from 2017 to 2020. I learned what I suspected. I don't like politics, and I don't like politicians. And I'm really not that interested in rubbing elbows with big muckety mucks. I'd rather put a flannel shirt on and maybe just go outside and take care of the grandkids or something like that. But we did get some important work done. And I learned that I was pretty good at working with the other side. In 2019, I had 7 bills on the Senate floor, and I was the chief author. And it was remarkable that we got all 7 bills passed. But what was more remarkable was that all 7 bills passed unanimously. So in a 34-33 Senate, every one of my bills had all A's and no nays. So when those 7 bills were done, we had some 450 votes in our favor with 0 nays. And the reason for that was because I went and I talked to the Democrats, because I was a Republican, and still am. And I said to them, this is why this is a good bill. This is why you should vote for it. A couple of them were mamby-pamby bills. You know, you name a section of highway after someone. That's not hard to get past. But one of them was a brand new chapter in law. And I had the chance to experience the full wrath in the 11th hour of Big Pharma. Because I had a bill where we were going to go after the pharmacy benefit managers. We took it to CVS Caremark, Optum, and Express Scripts. And we said, no more will you be changing formularies mid-year, making patients either pay a boatload of money to stay on their same drugs or change drugs, and when they don't want to because they've been on this drug successfully for years, and the reason they signed up with that insurance plan was so they could stay on that drug. And we said, we're going to register it, we're going to license you, and you're going to pay a big fee every year or you're not doing business in Minnesota. They weren't that pleased about it. We also said, you're not going to have any gag clauses with your independent pharmacies. And that was the problem, because they like to put language into a contract and then say that you can't disclose anything in the contract or you will have broken the contract. And that's a great way for you to control someone. And so we took that up. And that bill passed. But in those last days before we passed it, there was no question. Big Pharma was knocking at my door. But the important thing about 2019 for me was I knew I could do it. I know I could work with people. And I knew I could be successful at it. But I still made the decision to not run for re-election. And the reason was because of my wife. Mary knew that she was going to be in for the medical adventure of her life. And she went in about a 15 to 18 month span of time through 4 major surgeries. She had a tumor in front of her brain that needed to be removed. And thank the good Lord, it was not cancer. Then she had to have her neck rebuilt with artificial discs put in between the vertebrae. And then they fused 4, 5, 6, and 7. And she was very concerned that she'd walk around the rest of her life like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. Then she had to have her knee rebuilt and replaced. And then she had to have her shoulder rebuilt and replaced. And just for good measure, in the midst of it all, she went ahead and got COVID. At the end of it all, it was Christmas. Mary looked at me and she said, I haven't felt this good in a decade. So in our house, I'm living with a miracle. And I thank God for that every day. But the other thing that was happening when Mary was getting healthy and bionically rebuilt was COVID hit. And COVID hit hard. And it was April 3rd. And I've asked myself so many times, how would my life be different right now if I hadn't opened that email? I was flying around the office, I was running behind, trying to get caught up on my emails, and I was just ready to click delete. I didn't think this email needed to be opened. And I saw at the top, it said, vital statistics. Usually that's about death certificates, and I thought, shoot a mile. I better read it. They might have given us some information that I don't know about. And as you get older with your patients will pass. And so I certainly have done death certificates for years, and I've taught medical students and residents how to do them. So I thought, I'll go catch up, and I'll come back into this. So I saw a couple patients, came back in, opened the email, and my heart sank. I'm reading this one-page email from the Department of Health, and at the bottom it says, so, with COVID-19 here, we are asking that you make these changes. If COVID-19 is considered to be a contributing condition, don't put it in Part 2 under the contributing conditions. Put it as a cause of death. And it said, if it seems that COVID-19 might have been the cause of death, or more likely than not, you can put COVID-19 as a cause of death. And then they gave a link to the CDC's document as to how to complete death certificates. And in the 7-page document from the CDC, for the first time in 17 years, they were changing the rules, and they gave some scenarios to explain to physicians how we should do death certificates. And it was the last scenario where a woman was on hospice kind of care. She was dying. Family had said goodbye. And she passed. But it was okay to put it down as a COVID-19 death, even though she died of a stroke. And the reason you could put COVID-19 down was not because she ever had any symptoms of COVID-19, not because you had a positive PCR test, because you didn't do one. The doctor didn't do one, didn't think about doing one. But in the last days of life, that woman had been visited by her son. And a day or so after her son died, after she died, her son was diagnosed with COVID, and it was put down as a COVID death. And I thought, this is ludicrous. What I didn't know was that there were certain things that needed to happen in order for this pandemic to take us over and absolutely scare us silly and change our character and who we are. That was the first thing that needed to happen. We needed to have more deaths. We needed to be able to say the 80,000 deaths that we had in America in 2018 from influenza, that would be dwarfed by the COVID-19. You probably remember a guy named Neil Ferguson from England, and he came out with these astonishing predictions that we would have 2.2 million deaths. The whole thing had to be amped up. So 4 days later, after I read this email, I was asked to be on a TV news program out of Fargo-Moorhead with Chris Berg. And he wanted to talk about the lockdowns because I had already been frustrated with the lockdowns and didn't think that they made sense. So I was on his show and he asked me a question. And I don't even remember the question exactly, but it prompted me to say, well, Chris, it's sort of like this. I think people want this information straight up. They don't want to be fooled around with. They just don't want any game playing. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, like the Department of Health email I got last Friday that encouraged me to start using COVID-19 more casually and more liberally on a death certificate. And I was ready to move on, and Chris interrupted me and said, hold it. Dr. Jenson, he said, say that again. So I said it again. And we talked about it for a few minutes. Got done with the program. I still remember where I was. I was in my grandson's bedroom because I was over visiting them, and they were outside playing. And I told Mary, my wife, and my son and daughter-in-law that I needed to run in the house and find a Wi-Fi connection because I had to do this news program for 10 minutes, and then I'd be back out to play on the swing set. And so I was up in my grandson's bedroom. I didn't have anything really set on, so I sort of jerry-rigged my camera so it's looking at me like this. You sort of see my nostrils. You can see the crown molding on the back. It wasn't very professional, but it ended up changing my life. And so what happened was 2 days later, a woman named Laura Ingram, her producer, called. Now, I don't watch a lot of news. I do a lot of reading. So they said, we're from the Ingram angle and we'd like you on our program. I said, what program is that? They weren't terribly impressed. But it all worked out. And so I was on that night with Laura Ingram. And she was fascinated. And I remember, this was, and I normally wouldn't go into this kind of detail, but the minister said you want to stay till midnight, so I said, well, go ahead. So I got done with the Laura Ingram show, and I was on for maybe 5 minutes. And I was supposed to click off, but I'm sort of slow on the computer. I'm not real fast. So I was looking around, okay, what button do I press next? And while I'm doing that, I hear Laura talking to the producers. And she said, that was a rock star episode. Who is that guy? Because this was all Zoom. And he said, yeah, he's out of Minnesota. He said, how do you like that example he threw in there at the end about a woman getting hit by a bus and it still be coded as COVID? And so they're talking about, I thought, well, I did pretty well. So about 5 days later, they called me back. They said, we want you on again. This time, Laura was ready for me. She had some questions, and I didn't know what her questions were going to be. And in a situation like that, if you're Norwegian and you don't know what the questions are going to be, you're basically just going to answer them. You're not going to play any games. So she said, why are you being encouraged to do death certificates differently, or why are doctors being encouraged to diagnose COVID-19 in the hospital? And I said, well, it could be because of the money. Oof, I got in so much trouble for that. And she said, well, how do you mean? I said, well, if you're a Medicare patient and you get admitted to the hospital with a respiratory infection, and then after a couple of days you get discharged, the hospital receives a bundled payment of $5,000 for the cares given. Now, if you would put, instead of respiratory infection, if you put COVID-19 respiratory infection or COVID-19 pneumonia, then you don't get $5,000, you get $13,000. And if you happen to use a ventilator for a period of time during hospitalization, then you get $39,000. Wow. Well, now Laura's getting a little ticked, not at me, but she's astonished that she didn't know that. And so we got off the program, and it was after that I think I became sort of a coveted member of her medicine cabinet, because I've been on her show 15, 20 times, and I think because I was on her show, Tucker's had me on his, and then Rush Limbaugh came to my defense, and then what's the name? Tony Robbins, and then Dr. Drew and Glenn Beck, and we've done all these programs. And one day I was on the Moscow news, because Moscow was making a big deal about, in America, they're so afraid of the truth that a doctor who tells the truth gets in trouble. And I thought, wow, I never really expect any help from Mr. Putin, but I'm getting it. What I didn't realize was happening then was my life was changing. And I'm sure that this was the divine hand, because I had never been this kind of a controversial figure. I mean, I've always been a skeptic, and I've always been willing to ask a question. But I mean, I got hammered. I became the most investigated doctor in Minnesota. When I said that about the 5,000, the 13,000, and the 39,000, USA did a front page article on me, and they fact-checked me. And they thought that I was dead wrong. And they found out that I was right. And they published it. And that felt good. Yeah. But it didn't feel very good a month later when the Board of Medical Practice sent me a letter and said, we're investigating your license. That ticked me off. Now, my wife's a veterinarian. And as a vet, she knows how to take care of dogs and cats and a lot of other animals because she has an exotic animal practice prior to her retirement where she would take care of boa constrictors and birds and snakes and iguanas and help deliver eggs that got stuck in the iguana. I don't know quite how that happens. But it must be a malfunction. But anyway, what happened was Mary opened the letter and she said, Scott, this is going to be a problem. And it was. And it broke our heart. So I called my son, who's an attorney. I said, would you help me? And so for the next 6 days, we prepared a response that I wasn't a danger to medicine, I wasn't a danger to my patients, and I wasn't recklessly spreading misinformation. And it took about a month, but that was dismissed. A month later, another complaint came in, and I was back in a hot seat. And it took 3 months, and that one bothered me because they took it right up to the election. And I thought that they wanted maybe to keep me quiet. And so I called the Board of Medical Practice and said, how come you responded to the first complaint within 5 weeks, and now it's been 2 or 3 months? And they said, oh, we're getting to it. And it was unnerving, but about a week before the election, they came and said the allegations had been dismissed. Then in February it happened again, and then about a month ago, I had the audacity to submit an affidavit, a single-page affidavit, to support a petition to get a temporary restraining order against the FDA in terms of vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds. That was on the first week of May, and I think that if you recall, that was when the information broke about the myocarditis and the pericarditis in the young kids, but especially the young boys. Mm-hmm. That's what's got me now on the docket for the agenda for the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, September 27th, this month. So in about 2 weeks, I'll probably learn something. So that really did change our life. And Mary and I knew that something was going on because we were always now in the news. Mm-hmm. And what happened next was a convergence of 2 things. One is folks like you, every day, started reaching out to Mary and I. Someone would see me at the gas station and say, hey, Doc, we got your back. Thanks for speaking up. Mm-hmm. And people would see Mary in the grocery store and say, Mary, thanks for being so courageous. We got your back. The other thing that happened was the Bible started to speak to us in a pretty profound way. And it was all about Esther 4:14. And actually, my whole life can be described by 4:14. I mean, everybody always talks about 3:16. I'm a 4:14 guy. So Esther 4:14 says this. Have you considered you're in the position you're in for such a time as this? And Mary and I said, why has our life changed like this? I mean, we're 65 years old. This was sort of like the Jonah thing. No, I'm not going to Nineveh. I'm going to take a cruise in the Mediterranean. Or in Exodus 4:14, where it says God's anger burned because he was ticked off that Moses was declining the job and didn't want to do it. So God said, fine, we'll have Aaron help out. And then if you go to 4:14 in Luke, the words are, and the news of him spread throughout the land. And that seemed to be happening to us. And then if you go to John 4:14, it'll talk about, but if you drink of the water I give you, you'll never thirst. For the water I give you will become in you a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And then if you go to 4:14 in Ephesians, it'll say, we don't need to be tossed about like an infant to every wave or wind that comes along from cunning, scheming tricksters. I'm paraphrasing. And then you go to the last one, and you go to Hebrews, and it says, hold fast to the beliefs you profess. Yeah. So that was when Mary and I made the decision that we better start thinking about running for governor. People have been asking us to. So after a 6 to 12 month period of time, we made the decision pretty much on Christmas morning. We looked at each other, little pillow talk. Yep, we're doing it. So it took us about 2-3 months to get our team together. And if someone had told us that in the first 6 months of launching that we would raise over $1 million, which has never been done before in the Republican Party in the off year, that we would have 80,000 people join us on our email team, that every day when we released anything on our platforms between Facebook and TikTok, Twitter and Instagram, and I think there's a couple others the team has us on, that we'd have 500,000 people seeing these. We would never have dreamt that. But that's what's happened. And that reflects back onto Johann Goethe, who 200 years ago said, when you finally make the commitment, things will happen that you could never have imagined. And that's what we've experienced. So here we are. We're running for governor, and we've never done this. And I don't like politicians. So you're not going to get a career politician out of me. And that's how we got here today. So let's just dive in real quickly to the issues. You may have more questions about the issues when we do our Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to go through them pretty quickly. But there's definitely a top three. Top one, got to be public safety. We have a lawlessness that's moving through the land like a poison. And this doesn't get stopped because someone says, oh, we made a mistake. Let's shoot a mulligan, you know. When you play golf, if you hit a bad ball at the first tee, they'll give you a breakfast ball or a mulligan. There is no mulligan here. When Governor Walz decided to wait 72 hours before calling out the National Guard, it wasn't just Minneapolis that burned. It was city after city after city all through the land. So we have a lawlessness that we may have given birth to in Minnesota, but it's everywhere. And we're not going to stop it because we want it to stop. This is going to be hard work. If you go to Detroit City, or if you go to Newark, New Jersey, and you read about the riots that occurred in 1967, Detroit in 1967 had all three major car manufacturers and a monopoly at that. They had all the auto parts being made. They could pave their roads in gold. And when the riots hit in 67, 60 years later, many people still regard Detroit, despite billions and billions of dollars being pumped into that city, as the armpit of America. So Minneapolis doesn't get to recover because we want it to. When you walk to work in the morning in the Minneapolis sidewalks, you feel like you're abandoned, exposed, and naked. So we better remember that. If we want to deal with public safety, we've got to get back to some decency. And it's all about the ABCs of police work. A, appreciate the work they do. Could they do better? Just like doctors could, just like nurses could, just like anybody could? Sure. But the fact of the matter is, they never know what they're going to encounter when they take on that shift. I went down and talked to a young man named Eric Matson. About 24 months ago, 22 months ago, he went on a relatively ordinary, suspicious person in Waseca and got shot in the head by this guy. You never know what you're going to get. The B in the ABCs of lawful behavior is let the police departments build out what they need to build out to intersect with the needs of the community. In other words, I grew up in Sleepy Eye, 4,000 people. We don't need a SWAT team. But in Sleepy Eye, we need the police to be first responders because they're often the first people on the scene with heart attacks and strokes in evolution. Now, Minneapolis doesn't need their policemen and policewomen to be first responders because they've got a robust system of paramedics, EMTs, ambulances, hospital systems, and a bunch of other things. So they're covered there. But they need the SWAT team, and they may well need a mental crisis emergency team to be able to go out and deal with the suicides and evolution. That's what we need to do. We need to realize that police departments all over the state are trying to do their best. And then the ABCs, the C. The C is simply this. Catch and release might work fine for walleyes, but it doesn't work well for felons who insist on committing crimes that are hurting people. So that's what we have to do in public safety. Next big issue, election security. I'll be very candid. I think the legislature dropped the ball this year. I don't think we should have given Governor Walz a budget. We needed election security and we didn't get it. So now we're stuck. Between now and November of 22, we're not going to get any meaningful legislative action because the House won't forward it and the governor won't sign it. That means we're stuck. What should we do? We should do voter ID. More than 25 states do it. We should have provisional ballots. More than 47 states do it. But we're not doing it. So what can we do this time around? It's got to be election judges at every polling place in the metropolitan areas. We've got to have the election judges, and they've got to be there, and they have to stay there, even if someone comes in and says, oh, by the way, the pipes are leaking, you got to step out for a while. Right. We've got to do it better. Right. And we have to do everything we can, and we can't work for a 1 or 2% victory. We've got to create a movement, a groundswell, where we win by 12%, and there's no way they can take it away from us. That's what we've got to do.
That's right.
And then once we win, then we will get this voter ID thing straightened out.
Yeah.
You can't get, some places, you can't get a COVID shot without a photo ID.
Yeah.
You can't get a driver's license. You can't get on an airplane. You can't start a bank account. I mean, this is ridiculous.
That's right.
So we don't have to quibble about vouching and harvesting, absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. We can just acknowledge that both Democrats and Republicans alike have had concerns about the election system. So let's just clean it up and make sure that our election system has the integrity that we expect of it. Third issue. Our K-12 public education system is failing. And it's not failing because of teachers. It's failing for a variety of reasons, but the biggest reason is because of politicians and bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Teachers go into teaching because they want to affect kids' lives.
Yeah.
Now, there's a tendency for sometimes people to say something about teachers and associate teachers with Ed, Minnesota. That's not fair, because when you talk about me as a family doc, I don't want you determining what I'm about because of what the AMA does. I don't belong to the AMA, and less than 40% of physicians do. Now, what do I get from my various insurances as a physician and my various affiliations? I get my contracts negotiated because I'm not very good at it, and I don't know how I go against Blue Cross and do very well. So I want my contracts negotiated. I have, through my malpractice insurance, legal help in case I need it, and I need that. That's the same that teachers are. Teachers get those two things from their unions, from their Ed, Minnesota. That's understandable. So I think what we need to do is we need to say, why is our K-12 public education system failing? Well, part of it's because of stupidity. Part of it's because we've been throwing money down a black hole, and we don't hold anybody accountable. This year, the legislature gave K-12 the biggest increase that they've had in 15 years. That sounds to me like a job well done, and yet 4th and 8th graders in Minnesota are scoring less well in math and reading than kids in Mississippi. Now, I'm not trying to denigrate Mississippi, but we've never aspired to, can we please someday get to the point where we could be like Mississippi? We've never said that, but that's where we're at today. And Mississippi spends $9,000 a student. We spend 150% of that. We spend $13,500. So we've got to make some changes, and the changes are this. Let's recognize that parents should be critically involved in their kids' education. Let's fund the kids, not broken institutions.
Yeah.
Let's let you choose, because if you do, you will look at the full menu of options. You'll say, well, charter schools, homeschooling, private schools, Christian schools, starting schools, the public school. I'm going to make a choice. And you're going to make your choice based on how your child learns. Your child may be one of these hands-on learners. When I was a kid in school, we had shop, or industrial arts, we called it shop. We had auto mechanics. We had a lot of things that you didn't necessarily have to just read a book.